Well, good morning. It's a hard act to follow. As I was doing my research on the resurrection and ascension, I ran across a story that was told by Congressman Morris Udall about what happened in the Kremlin when Khrushchev died. Brezhnev and other communist leaders wanted to get Khrushchev's body out of the country, so they called President Nixon to see if they could bury it in the United States. Nixon said he couldn't give them permission because he'd received too much criticism from the American people. Brezhnev then called Prime Minister Heath of England and got a similar turndown. He finally called Prime Minister Golda Meir of Israel. Meir said she would help. If the Russians came in the middle of the night, they could bury his body in a remote spot. However, Meir added, I must warn you that this country has the highest resurrection rate. Well, I would like for Unity Spirituality Center to beat that statistic, and we're ready. I would like for you too to resurrect from all of your worldly problems, your issues, your concerns, and ascend to a level where joy and hope and abundance reside. And you can. All spiritual teachings have taught us how to resurrect from them, as we've seen already recently in the Easter story. And I hope, by the way, that you all had a very wonderful Easter, maybe a little time off for relaxation and meditation, time to be with family or friends. And I hope that you let that be a reminder of the way your life should always be. Happy, fulfilling, lived far above the maddening crowd, in the world but not of it, so to speak. And to do this, we need to affirm that higher frequency of life and deny the negative dark places in our lives. And we don't need to struggle against the dark. We only need to turn on the light, right? And follow two commands, basically. The first is to love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. And the second is, love one another as I, Jesus, have loved you. Easy? Yes. But simple to do? Well, not so easy. So what do these commands actually mean to us if they mean so much that they can help us resurrect and ascend from our earthly problems? What do they really mean? Well, loving the Lord with all your heart and strength and mind means surrendering yourself physically, emotionally, and intellectually and spiritually to the higher principle of life, which we in English call God, the divine spirit, or maybe the oneness, or maybe the force, whatever makes sense to you. Sorry. If we choose to go against the current of life, against the eternal wisdom, if we choose to stand separate from that, as our egos or worldly conditioning would definitely have us do, we will live in a vortex of chaos, negativity, and confusion instead of peace, love, and happiness. It's just the way it works. I think we all can verify this by this point in life. There is really a divine order in things. It's always there, this divine order. We can regulate our lives accordingly and enjoy the peace that passeth all understanding, or we can choose to go against the current and turn life into a never-ending battle of egos, negativity, fear, and suffering. Loving the Lord our God with all our heart and mind and strength and soul means committing ourselves to a higher order of life, a higher vibratory rate, if you will, and becoming a higher order of being, a spiritual being, not just a mass of physical protoplasm, instincts, and programming. As for the second command, unconditionally loving each other, that is really, when you think about it, only possible if we abide by the first. We can only know agape or unconditional love when we trade the ego's conditional, possessive, or narcissistic attachment for a recognition that there is only one power and one presence in the universe, and that everyone is a part of it. So there's no one that we can be separate from and feel okay, really. So how do we really ascend to this higher frequency, this state where everything turns out right? We can define it. We can understand it intellectually. We're really good at that at Unity. And we can even know in our hearts that it's true, I think most of us do believe that. But how do we access it? How do we create heaven on earth for ourselves? Well, first of all, it takes making a decision to go for it. It takes staying on the course toward our goal. It takes constantly denying our thoughts like doubt, negativity, fear, and unforgiveness, and affirming higher values like hope and zeal and faith and compassion and being positive. Now, often, when things are going really well in our lives, we feel pretty peaceful and happy. Don't most of you feel fairly peaceful and happy when things are going pretty well in the outside world? We have hope and faith and zeal, and we even have more compassion for others. But what about when we get fired, we lose someone we love, we go through some crisis in our lives, those dark nights of the soul? How do we turn on the light to banish the darkness when we are in the midst of that darkness? First of all, we ask for divine guidance. We quit letting our egos live our lives. We remember to ask. We don't try to solve everything on our own. By ascending to higher frequencies, we mean raising ourselves to a level where we no longer are living at effect. We start living at cause. Anyone can be happy and peaceful when life is going well, but the point is to ascend to a level where we can maintain our equilibrium and resurrect from what could feel like often a crucifixion, right? The Easter story, including the 40 days after Jesus' resurrection, before his ascension, shows us the way. Despite all that was happening to Jesus Christ, his disciples falling asleep and not protecting him, betrayal, an unfair trial, conviction, and crucifixion, Jesus didn't see the events as others did. He even forgave his executioners, the clamoring crowd, the Bible says, who had screamed, "Crucify him," to the point where Pontius Pilate finally did so. Jesus was even able to say, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." The story clearly tells us that every crisis, even ones as seemingly bad as Jesus' crucifixion, can be a new opportunity to start all over, to resurrect and ascend to a higher place, better and bigger than ever. When we align ourselves with the God principle, the universal wisdom of the universe, answers start becoming obvious, and often quickly and more powerfully than we can even imagine. Usually it's just a matter of seeing the situation differently. Remember, at those crucial times of darkness, though, you must ask for help. And remember that every last straw problem can be the first step to something new. It's no accident that the Chinese character for crisis also means what? Opportunity, yes. The story of Jesus' power over this life and its turmoils and his resurrection were due to his understanding of and living the eternal wisdom, which is what we all need to do, of course, and we can do it. But the story doesn't stop with Easter and his resurrection. it goes on to portray his actual ascension to becoming one with the Father, this universal energy. And we too are told that we can ascend into oneness with the divine, with the oneness principle. We can resurrect from our former selves and ascend to permanent Christ consciousness, this higher frequency of living. When we do, we can transmute turmoil, see situations sanely, and harness happiness, learning ultimately to be at cause and not at effect in our lives by seeing things differently. We can then more and more quickly breeze through, resurrect from what many might see as a crisis, like Jesus' crucifixion, and ascend to a permanently higher level of life where all is well, no matter what seems to be happening out there. Now, after Jesus resurrected, he spent 40 days with his disciples and others. 500 people saw him in that state. They didn't always recognize him at first. The lesson here is that we often don't recognize the Christ out there in the world, especially in others. The story says that those who didn't recognize him at first finally did so. And that's telling us that we can too. We can get to the point where we can see the God in everyone. Now, it's no accident that the Ascension story uses the number 40 for the number of days that passed between Jesus' resurrection and his ascension. According to the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, 40 represents completion. Completion of a period of testing, trial, or probation. The number 40 is used 146 times in the scriptures. For example, Moses lived 40 days in Egypt before he gained freedom, and 40 days in the desert before God selected him to lead his people out of slavery, out of bondage. He was also on Mount Sinai for 40 days and nights on 2 separate occasions in Exodus. Before completing his preparation to receive God's laws, Elijah went 40 days without food or water. Jesus was tempted by the devil not just 3 times, but many times during the 40 days and nights that he fasted to complete his preparation before his ministry began. Rain fell on Noah and the ark for 40 days and 40 nights while he prepared himself to start a new life. It often takes us time after the storms of life to prepare ourselves to see them as opportunities. That's normal, but you must never lose faith. Moses, Noah, Elijah, and Jesus didn't. And the lesson is that we should not either ever lose faith. There are for us daily resurrections before we permanently ascend to another way of living and thinking and being. Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believeth in me, though he die, yet shall he live." When we finally permanently die to our former selves, we too can ascend to a permanently higher level. "These that believeth in me, the works that I do, shall he do also, and greater." This clearly states, and we say this often at Unity, that we can all resurrect from our old selves, the selves that we die to, and ascend to something higher. We're not stuck in our old selves. We're just used to them. During the 40-day period after his resurrection, Jesus prepared for his ascension, as we must all do in order to attain oneness with the divine on a permanent level. During these 40 days, we all see evidence of the way that Jesus saw reality. which is the way he taught us to see reality. For example, when Jesus' disciples were fishing on the shores of Tiberias, they were discouraged because they had toiled all night and had caught nothing. They had been casting their nets from the wrong side of the boat. When Jesus told them to cast their nets on the right side of the boat, their nets were full of fish. The wrong or left side of the boat represents negative thoughts and thoughts of failure. The right side represents our being positive, having faith, and not doubting no matter what, which always in the end meets with success. This kind of thinking produces a resurrection from old beliefs and restrictions, boundaries, and limitations in our lives. The Easter story tells us that we can resurrect from anything, even a seeming crucifixion, and ascend to a place where we can finally see that all is in divine order, and it is. Unity theologian Dr. Herbert Hunt describes this ascension by saying, and I quote, "Jesus dropped his personal consciousness by which we separate ourselves from our true God self. He became consciously one with the absolute principle of being. He simply entered the inner spiritual realms. He will become visible to those who put on the Christ, which is accomplished by refining, spiritualizing, and rising both soul and body to higher degrees." Dr. Hunt says that each step of the way has been recognized as a symbol of a step that we may take as we travel kingdomward, like the wise man who builds his home on the rock. So, 1, how do you resurrect and ascend from situations and experiences and use them for personal development? Grist for the mill. 2, how do you keep from succumbing to despair in a traumatic situation like the one Jesus Christ encountered? 3, how do you keep from passing by or ignoring all of the opportunities that daily life presents to you when things aren't going right? And how do you turn a crisis into an actual opportunity? Well, let me tell you a story. A woman had a cherished gift from an old friend, a rather expensive silk handkerchief. She accidentally got a big ink blot on it. She showed it to an artist friend and said, "It's ruined. It's of no good to me anymore. How could I be so stupid as to get a blot of ink on this beautiful, precious thing? I am just going to throw it away because now it's ruined." The artist asked his friend if he could take the handkerchief home instead of her throwing it away. A few weeks later, he sent it back to the woman. He had used the blot as a starting point and had drawn a strikingly attractive design in India ink. The handkerchief was now more beautiful than when the woman had first received it. The artist used his skills to turn disaster into a work of art. And we too can transmute all crises and use them to design a new life. Many times we will have a big blot on our lives, and our human minds will say, "What's the use? I give up. I don't know how to get through this." But these are the very moments when you must ask God to see the situation differently, to see the possibilities inherent in that situation. They're always there. Marcel Proust, the French writer who is considered by the literary world to be the greatest writer under study today, once said, "The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes." The Easter story of resurrection and ascension 40 days later is about our resurrection from old ways of thinking, seeing, and being, and our ascension to a higher order, a divine frequency, if you will. We can ascend to the level where we can see that divine order in everything, the potential in all our problems and issues. We can learn to see the ink blots on our silk scarves as starting points for a beautiful new life. So think of the 40 days after Easter as your preparation for your ascension into permanent oneness with the higher, more elevated parts of your life, your ascension to a higher frequency. Know that every crucifixion can be followed by a resurrection and ultimately an ascension to a permanent higher consciousness, which is heaven on earth. Let us work together at Unity. Let us help each other learn to crucify our old ways of negative thinking and resurrect from them with hope and joy and peace and abundance. May we, as leaders of the spiritual community, replace Jerusalem as having the highest resurrection rate in the world. We can do it, and you deserve it, and it is time. Amen.